Welcome back to Murder with Friends. Today we're talking about the Port Arthur Massacre, and I'm joined again by Anna Kasparian. And Anna, in the second part, I want to talk a little bit about what people speculate the motive to be, and then also why are there so many conspiracy theories regarding the Port Arthur Massacre when, in the first part we talked about how many witnesses there are, how much evidence there is against Martin Bryant as a lone gunman. But before we jump in, let's talk a little bit about why Martin Bryant was motivated to go on this killing spree. I found a clip which speculates a little bit about his motivation, so let's take a look at that.
His father committed suicide, from what we understand, from the sheer burden of trying to keep this kid, who he loved but he knew could become dangerous, on a leash.
Just 10 months before his father's death, Bryant had also lost another great supporter, Helen Harvey, a local eccentric, an heiress to the Tattersall's fortune.
She was a lady who clearly was looking for a child substitute. And what better child substitute than Martin Bryant, who had the emotional and intellectual age of a 5-year-old. And essentially, she adopted him.
So you touched a little bit on the money that he inherited from Helen in part 1, and I think that that is a crucial component to how he was able to have this arsenal of weapons.
Yes.
So that comes into play here. Mm-hmm. She definitely had an influence on what he was able to purchase. And then the suicide of his father is apparently a big impact, and how that comes back to the people who own the Seascape property.
Right.
Is very interesting. Apparently he had all this animosity and this anger towards the Martin family for owning this bed and breakfast Seascape, which was located on Port Arthur. That's
right. So
strange connection.
So his father allegedly wanted to purchase that property, and something happened where his father was unable to do so. I guess he was denied the ability to purchase it. And so when Bryant's father committed suicide, one potential motive, and I've seen this a lot in reports, was that Bryant felt that his father committed suicide as a result of not being able to acquire that property, and fell into depression and took his own life. So that's one possibility. Another possibility, of course, is the fact that, and it was mentioned in that video that we just played, that he wasn't all there mentally speaking. Mm-hmm. He was never diagnosed with depression. He was never diagnosed with schizophrenia. But, there were a few people close to him who had said that there was something off, there was something wrong. I believe his mother even said that he possibly suffered from schizophrenia. Mm-hmm. So, look, I think that you have to have something mentally wrong with you to ruthlessly kill 35 people the way that he did. Since he was never diagnosed by a professional, I feel weird speculating about it. But there are, all sorts of motives floating around, but at the end of the day, I think that he was unhinged, to say the least. And he started buying these weapons in 1993. The shooting happened in 1996. So I don't know if it was premeditated, years ahead. Mm-hmm. But it is scary to know that he kind of started building this arsenal 3 years prior to the shooting.
Yeah, I also think that it's worth noting he had the IQ of reportedly 66, which is very low. And you saw in that video that he had the mental capacity of a 5-year-old. I've heard some people speculate as much as an 11-year-old, but he was very stupid. Mm-hmm. He just was. So I don't know whether or not he was premeditating exactly what was going to happen, but the laws that were in place gave him the ability and the access to build an arsenal, even though he wasn't all there. And everyone kind of knew that about Martin Bryant. I do think that there's something interesting about the connection to the Martin family and Seascape, and whether or not that was sort of a catalyst. Something was set in motion or was really unhinged him from just killing the Martin family to, I'm not going to stop here. Yeah. Because it's interesting that they were the first victims, and then he carried out the massacre. I wonder about how much of it could be premeditated, because he wasn't all there.
Yeah,
Who knows?
That's a good point.
And it's also it's not important. I don't want to focus too much on him and his motive. I don't want to give him that recognition, because obviously you guys saw from the clips, he loves it too much.
Yeah, and look, here's another thing to keep in mind. Shortly before this shooting happened, there was another shooting relatively nearby. And some psychologists believe that, some mass shooters will see that and see the publicity, even though it's obviously negative publicity, those shootings will get, the press attention that those shootings will get, and it will encourage them to carry out a shooting of their own because they find some sort of glory in it. So if you are mentally unstable, if you are unhinged, you might see someone carrying out a mass shooting, and you might see the amount of attention and negative fame that you get as a result of that, and it might encourage you to do the same.
And also, if you don't have the mental capacity to differentiate between what is good fame and bad fame, he probably, or might have seen it as just fame in general, just getting the sort of recognition, the connection that he longed for that he wasn't getting, which is why he had to buy all these plane tickets to go sit next to people on flights, and why he was buying things he didn't need at stores just to talk to someone behind a counter. So who knows exactly what was going on, but now we do have to address the conspiracy theories, because more than any other case I've ever researched, on every single video I would watch, there were exorbitant amounts of people on the internet that have these lengthy and very, I guess, verbose conspiracy theories about what happened in Port Arthur. A lot of people do not believe that Martin Bryant acted alone. Some people don't believe that he ever fired a gun to begin with, that he was even there. That there's a lot of that. And I kind of wonder what effect that the evidence is sealed had on these conspiracy theories sprouting up. Because some people say that if you just let the public have all access to the information, then no questions will come up, or you want to keep it private to respect the families. I don't really know what the answer is here, but I do think that there is some correlation to the judge sealing the evidence and having no trial, that people were sort of invited to put forth their own theories, since there wasn't theories at a trial.
Let me just start this portion of the conversation by saying that it's incredibly insulting to victims and family members of victims to have to hear individuals minimize what they witnessed and experienced firsthand, especially from individuals who were not there, who have pretty much no idea what they're talking about, right? So if I lost a family member, or if I were there and survived that kind of brutal attack, it would just add insult to injury to hear the opinions of people who have no idea, right? And so I think you make a good point. The evidence is sealed, and so people are going to be super suspicious about that. But understand what that evidence includes. It includes probably images of slayed bodies. It includes just horrific proof of what happened on that scene. And so once you unseal that, and in the age of the internet, I mean, you can't escape it if you are a family member who lost someone, or if you were there and you want to, forget it or try to heal. So I can understand why the judge would want to do it. Look, there are all sorts of irrational, unreasonable people who love conspiracy theories. And here's another reality to keep in mind. There was a conspiracy theory about the birthplace of President Barack Obama. He released his birth certificates to prove that he was, in fact, born in the United States. And you know what happened? The conspiracy theories continued, right? So I think they're unreasonable, irrational people. And unless they have some hardcore evidence that that shooter was not there and there was actually someone else and there was some sort of weird, government cover-up, if you don't have evidence, I don't want to hear from you. It's that simple.
Well, and I think a big part of the conspiracy theories that I've read is that they're the omission of evidence, and that to them is evidence in and of itself, which doesn't really make sense.
They don't know anything about the evidence.
If you don't know something, you can't prove that you know something by not knowing something.
You can't say that there's no evidence just because the evidence is sealed. You have to understand the reasoning behind sealing such evidence, right? So put yourself in the victim's shoes, okay? And for 1 second, all the people who love playing games with all these conspiracy theories need to have a little bit of empathy, right? So if you were the victim, would you want bloodied, terrible pictures of your family members or even of you like floating around the internet? Probably not. You probably want to protect your own privacy in a situation
with regards
like that.
to the trial, the judge makes it really clear in his statement that it was really, in a strange way, it was very kind of Martin Bryant to plead guilty, because it doesn't put the families through the trauma that would be testifying in a court case, and that
Right.
is incredibly traumatic. And so that was sort of the last and only dignity that he granted the families of the victims
Yeah.
or the survivors that were there, that they don't have to relive that. So when you're asking, like, why wasn't there a trial, think about what you're asking when you want there to be this trial when this guy is pleading guilty, and there's video evidence, there are eyewitnesses that say this guy,
Yeah,
like, that's
there
the
were
one.
so many witnesses, so that there's evidence for you right there. But here's one thing that I do disagree with. I do believe that it's important to have a trial.
Okay.
I think that that's a huge part of a working justice system, and I understand the reasoning for not wanting to have a trial in this case, but I think they could have had a trial with a jury, and they could still seal the evidence in order to protect the privacy of the victims. Maybe it'll only be accessible to those who are in the jury and hearing the case. But other than that, I think a trial is important.
That was something about this case that I had to reconcile as well. I
Yeah.
spent a lot of hours trying to figure out why there wasn't a trial, what was the precedent in the Tasmanian justice system, and it seems like that's the system that works for them. Great,
Yeah.
awesome, but it is, as we're used to the American justice system, and that's very outside of the norm, so it was a little strange. And that was, the fact that there wasn't a trial for a while was why I was able to sort of explore these conspiracy theories. I was like, that's a little strange.
Yeah.
But then you hear from the judge, you understand where the Tasmanian justice system is coming from. So I understand that. Now, you mentioned Bryant's mother, and I found a clip of her she changed her tune a little bit with regards to conspiracy theories. She said initially that Bryant, her son, was guilty, then she has changed, and she says that he is now not guilty, and I found a clip of her explaining a little bit why.
But are you really saying that you think if he'd had a trial, although you convinced him to plead guilty, he might have got off?
Well, yes.
Is that
Because Martin always, when he was questioned, probably for weeks before I saw him again, he always said he was never in Port Arthur at Broad Arrow.
And you believed him?
Yes. There's no evidence
but
that
none of-
Martin was there.
But none of that was needed because Martin said in court, yes, I did it. And you went along with it.
Exactly.
And now you wish you hadn't.
Of course, I'll regret it for the rest of my life.
Okay. I don't care what his mother has to say. What I do care about, though, is the way a journalist handles an interview like that. And he just conceded in a weird way that there was no evidence, but there is evidence. Eyewitness testimony is evidence. There is evidence, it's just sealed, right? So I don't know why he conceded that. I think that small misstep, and I think it was a mistake, I don't think he intended to do it, really fuels the conspiracy theories that we were talking about, because someone watching that who doesn't actually investigate, corroborating eyewitness reports or actual facts related to the story will look at that and be like, see, even the reporter says there's no evidence. There is evidence. There is evidence.
Well, that's actually a really good segue because I found another clip of a conspiracy theorist, so someone not related to Martin or any of the victims in any way, went on an Australian news program, and he wanted to plead his case for a conspiracy theory in the Port Arthur case, and let's see how you think that journalist handled that.
Well, I guess if you want to look at it, I'll call them discrepancies because I don't want to label them necessarily with calling them conspiracy theories. But there are things like, because there was no open trial, there were never any fingerprints taken from the scene that proves that Martin was there. There were never any ballistic evidence matching the firearms to the crime scene or Bryant to the firearms.
There's not going to be ballistics evidence because there was a confession. Like, that's not going to be presented in front of court because there was a confession.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. Once somebody pleads guilty, you don't have to provide evidence and do all that stuff.
So there's nothing to be made
but then
of
I
the
guess
fact that
people have to understand
that this evidence hasn't been presented publicly. Of course it hasn't been presented publicly. That's the way the system works. If there was a defensible case, in this case, it would have run a trial.
So what do you think about how that journalist handled that interview?
Well, again, you don't know whether or not they took the fingerprints. The evidence is sealed. It's sealed. So the conspiracy theorists are coming out and they're saying they didn't take any evidence. But obviously there is evidence that has been sealed. So, and you're complaining about it being sealed, so how would you know what that evidence entails, right? So I think the journalist did his best, but I think that they immediately pivot to, well, this is how our justice system works. And I don't think that that's a good enough defense, right? Because I think that's actually a flaw in their justice system. Look, I'm American, so obviously we have plenty of flaws in our justice system as well.
No!
Plenty. So I don't want anyone in Australia to think that I'm passing judgment on them at all, but I do think it is important to have a trial and at least present that evidence to the jury, even if you do not want that evidence to be made public. You want to seal it and only allow those in the case to see it. However, yeah, the journalist immediately, in a way, conceded that no fingerprints were taken. But do we know that without a shadow of a doubt? We don't know what kind of evidence they collected because, again, for the billionth time, that evidence has been sealed.
Yeah, and to my final thought on conspiracy theories or discrepancies, whatever you want to call them, is look at the case of Sandy Hook or in the JFK assassination. The government agencies can still put forth a report, or investigative agencies can put forth a report and have it be as complete as they possibly can. And people will still go in there and find holes in it where they think there are holes, and they will still try and find, if you're looking for a conspiracy theory, you're going to find it.
Absolutely.
And that's a big part of what this show is kind of about. There are a lot of different theories on like the Zodiac killer, and that's why because it was unsolved, people, it makes them more excited and they want to learn more about it. And I think that's just how conspiracy theories work. If you're looking for one, you're gonna find it anywhere. And even if you have all the access, even if the evidence wasn't sealed, they would still find something. If there was a Warren report, like in the case of JFK for Port Arthur, if they had some sort of a report that they put forth, here are our findings, people would still be like, doesn't add up, doesn't make sense. And a big part of that, which is what we're gonna get into in the third part, is the fact that there was such swift government action following this massacre. And that's what people don't understand. They're like, we're so used to the government being lethargic. All of a sudden, they spring into action following a massacre of people on their land. That doesn't make any sense. We're so used to inaction. So when then you see the government take action, there's got to be a conspiracy. That's what I come back to when I talk about the Port Arthur Massacre. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had our own version of a similar shooting, although it happened, unfortunately, on a school campus, the Sandy Hook shooting. And we had unhinged conspiracy theorists claim that that was a false flag operation, which was incredibly, incredibly hurtful and insulting to the victims, people who had lost their children as a result of that shooting and had to sit and listen to a crazy madman in this country claim that it was a government operation just to push for gun control. So look, it doesn't just happen in Australia, it happens in other countries as well, primarily ours. But we're not used to real change in the United States because of the fact that gun lobbies and the weapons manufacturers that fund those gun lobbies have way more power than the average American voter. They are represented much more than people like you and me. And so that is a corrupt system that I don't know if we're ever going to be able to fix, but that's the reason why you don't see swift action here. That's the reason why you can have a mass shooting on a school campus, on college campuses. You can have several mass shootings in any given year, and you will not see change because organizations like the NRA are more important to politicians than they are to American lives and the people who actually go out there and vote for them. So it's devastating. However, in Australia, things are a little different. And, in 1996, all of a sudden, this horrible thing happens, one of the worst massacres in Australian history, and politicians realize, oh wow, we have to change something. We actually have to be leaders.
Yeah, and actually, on that note, I think that's what we're going to get into in the third part. So in part 3, we're going to talk a little bit about gun reform and how Australia reacted to the Port Arthur Massacre. We'll see you then.